It's not often that I react to a piece of news that I hear. Not often at all. It's not one of those things where I have a knee-jerk reaction to reading some post. However, there has been I think you could say, um, a post that has caused a stramash. I think that would be the best way to think about this. The organisation Liberation Scotland posted on its X account last night a statement in which it went on at length, actually. This is a very long statement, broadly in support of the agreement which was signed between I beg your pardon, Believe in Scotland and the SNP recently. It's a cooperation agreement between the SNP and Believe in Scotland. Now, this initially, when I first heard about the agreement, I thought, well, okay, that's fine, but let's keep this in context. This is just one agreement with the SNP reaching out to what I would have said was a very SNP friendly organisation under the leadership of Gordon McIntyre Kemp, who is a committed independence supporter. And I don't think there's anything wrong with people saying that they broadly support the idea that the SNP would reach out to other organisations. So the statement that Liberation Scotland made appeared to fall into that category. But what was strange about it, and this was, I think, rather dissonant, it jarred with me as well, was that their statement went out last night on X, on their X account, at about 5 past midnight. So it was the wee hours of the morning when this statement dropped on X. Now, having had a look at Liberation Scotland's website, this statement does not appear in their website. In fact, their website appears to be a page in which the last news release or press release from Liberation Scotland was actually in June of this year. So they haven't released any press releases since June. So this long statement looked at this agreement between, I believe, in Scotland and the SNP, and whilst it broadly supported it, they did say, and if you read the article all the way down to the end, you'll see this, that they have some substantial concerns about the lack of any mechanism or process that would lead to independence. So this was a fairly measured statement. It went on at length. However, it provoked a real storm of comments from many prominent independence campaigners and members of other parties, members of Liberation Scotland, members of Salvo, members of the SNP, I guess, as well. There were people from all over commenting on this. Now, the instant reaction was, who sent this? Why is it not attributed to anybody? It seems wrong. It seems to be saying that Liberation Scotland, which says in its statement that it is a non-party political organisation, doesn't support any party over any other. Why does it appear to be supporting the SNP? But did it? Because this statement seemed to say not that it was supporting the SNP, but it supported the agreement that had been reached between the party and Believe in Scotland. Now, the reaction to this by many members of Liberation Scotland has been to resign, or to threaten to resign, or to demand to know who put out this statement and why Liberation Scotland did not have this statement prepared, discussed, and offered to the membership before it went public. Now, I've searched high and low over the last hour or two, all over the internet, for any sign of this statement from Liberation Scotland, and the only place I found it was X. And it's attributed to their page, and it appears to be just simply a statement saying that this is generally not a bad thing. We support it, in principle. We have concerns that there's nothing contained in it which says that there is a process or a route that leads to independence. But they welcome the fact that both McIntyre Kemp for Believe in Scotland and the SNP itself both committed themselves to supporting and upholding the sovereignty of the people of Scotland. Now, that is something you would expect from both those organisations. In fact, you would expect that from any political party or pro-independence organisation to support the sovereignty of the people, as vested in Scottish law or Scots law under the Claim of Right Act of 1689. So all of that is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I suspect that the main reason that this caused such an argument was because of when it appeared and on which social media appeared. Now, I also understand it has been shared widely on other social media platforms like WhatsApp and Instagram. So people have been flashing this back and forward overnight. What does this mean? Who said this? Why did they say this? Does this mean that Liberation Scotland is no longer agnostic in terms of its political parties? Nobody seems to know. But also nobody seems to know who authored this actual article. Initially, when I heard about it, and I heard what had been said, and I heard this from Norrie Hunter on a phone call this morning when he mentioned this to me and said there was a tremendous argument going on amongst prominent independent supporters in various parties and organisations over this. And having looked at it and read it all the way through, the article itself is relatively innocuous. It's giving a broad brush support to the idea of the SNP reaching out to other parties, but it doesn't ostensibly support the SNP at all. In fact, it criticises the fact that there is no plan for how to obtain independence, something which I've been banging on about, and so have many other people, for months. Why has the SNP not said anything about how we'll get our independence? That brings me to Mr. Swinney's speech, this new plan that the SNP has for independence, being presented, presumably, as the precursor to their campaign for re-election next May. So you would expect the SNP to start mentioning independence, and this reaching out to Gordon McIntyre Kemp and Believe in Scotland, I believe it was really an attempt to pluck some very low-hanging fruit. Had the SNP reached out to Alba, for example, and said this, let's have an agreement between us to campaign together for independence, that would have been remarkable. And had Alba said, yeah, let's do that, that would have been newsworthy. But this statement from Liberation Scotland isn't that. It's a general kind of, yeah, that's okay. It's nice that the SNP is reaching out to somebody, but why aren't they reaching out to everybody else? This is the question I've been asking. So is this or is this not a crisis within the movement? Well, some people see this as perhaps being a bogus statement, that maybe some malicious person has posted this online to divide supporters. It certainly seems to have had that effect among some prominent pro-independence candidates and members of parties. Although I think that, although it looks suspicious, the timing was suspicious. The effect it's had seems to point to the fact that it was done deliberately to cause division. But when you actually read the content of the article, it's fairly bland, and it's not as provocative as the reactions to it would suggest. So looking at it in the round, and I discussed this with Norrie Hunter at great length actually before making this broadcast today, how we react to this really determines the nature of the campaign going forward. It's who we trust and what they say. And do we trust what they say? Do we know where it comes from? Now, Liberation Scotland has a series of volunteers. Now, I understand that at least one volunteer actually waded into this fray today, saying that he was a volunteer who posted online on behalf of Liberation Scotland, but it's not clear whether it was this individual who posted this article or not. It's not attributed to any particular member of Liberation Scotland, and therefore, is it an official statement? And if it isn't an official statement, why was it posted in the first place? If it is an official statement, why is it not on their flagship website? Because as far as I can see, the website of Liberation Scotland has not changed for the last 3 months. Nothing has happened on that website. I think it's largely been allowed to just sit there as a shop window. with a lot of very good articles about Scotland's sovereignty, about its history, about why it's not in a union, why we still have our sovereignty, and why it's perfectly legitimate for us to vote to end the union. All of that stuff's still there, but this article wasn't. And as far as I know, it wasn't posted anywhere else. In talking with Nori an hour or so ago, I was just saying that I think the place you don't want to make a major political statement supporting anything at all is on X, because X is a bear pit of hatred and abuse. It exists so that people can slag each other off. That's what they do. X is polluted beyond belief by many right-wing nut jobs who basically been liberated by Elon Musk and allowed to say whatever they like. However, I just don't think that if I were in charge of Liberation Scotland and I had a website called liberation.scot, that I would post this on X. If it were a real statement on behalf of the organisation, it should have come from the organisation's website and then been quoted. This is happening back to front. So it's either one of two things. It's either a deliberate act to sabotage the independence movement by splitting it and causing divisions, which is the way people have reacted to it, or it's an amazingly stupid blunder by an individual, perhaps well-meaning, who thought that posting this article on X was a good thing to do, because it basically said that any cooperation between the SNP and other groups was good, which of course it is, or it would be. But the SNP has become such a toxic brand amongst other parties that it's very difficult to convince anybody that the SNP has any laudable aspirations whatsoever, and certainly that it has any intentions of actually going for independence rather than just talking about it. So I found myself in a really ambiguous position here. I have in the past obviously criticised the SNP pretty strongly for not laying out the actual plan and process for achieving independence, assuming that they get a majority in May next year. John Swinney's statement appears to suggest, incidentally, that the SNP would only take action for independence if it gets an outright majority in May. And they're still posting that it should be SNP first and second votes, which has arithmetically been proven time and time again to mostly let unionists into the list seats. So why are they doing it? Well, I think the honest answer to that is that the party sees this as a fight between parties because it's an election. They want to win the election. That's what parties are for. And so they've set out, support us in both votes, which is what they always say. No surprise there, really. So although the SNP's reached out to Believe in Scotland, which is effectively, I think, an outreach group which Gordon McIntyre-Kemp had started in order to connect people in the movement with himself, first of all, with that organisation to produce a sort of hub, a centre, and perhaps, now with his agreement with the SNP, to feed those ideas to the SNP through Believe in Scotland. Now, I'm just surmising this. This is not perhaps the truth. I'm just guessing, but I think it should be laid out what Believe in Scotland is actually for. What is its reason for existence? What is its mechanism? How does it help the independence movement itself to influence what happens with political parties? Now, if it's only influencing the SNP, which it appears to be at the moment through this agreement, that's not good enough, because the SNP is not the only party of independence, although they would like us to think that. They are the biggest independence party, but they have hemorrhaged at least half of their support in recent years through lack of action. John Swinney, I think it's fair to say that some people believe, in the SNP at least, that he's a safe pair of hands, that he's going to steer the ship on a steady course, a middle ground, if you like. He's not going to be too radical, he's not going to be too conservative, he's going to be somewhere down the middle. And that's what political parties like to do. They like to appeal to people from both the left and the right of the political spectrum simultaneously. This is what the Labour Party is trying to do at the moment in London, and failing miserably by pretending to be a kind of wet Tory party, but still doing Tory policies. Here in Scotland, the SNP had a bit of a reputation for a while for being left-leaning. Now it doesn't. John Swinney appears to be completely agnostic in terms of political persuasion, whether it's more socialist, more conservative, more authoritarian. But the SNP itself, unfortunately, has fallen victim to the disease of authoritarianism within the party. And so the party general election, which I believe is coming up very shortly, I'm not certain of the location of this. It used to be Perth, but anyway, wherever the SNP's conference is being held this year, this whole idea of reaching out to other groups and parties needs to be debated. Not only debated, but it needs to be decided as policy to bury the hatchet and to stop undermining other smaller parties on the list. Simply because it is much easier to get an entire pro-independence majority if you encourage the smaller parties on the list by not standing against them in certain key seats where they're likely to win the seat. But will that happen, and will the conference and the members of the SNP manage to amend some of the policies to make that happen? Well, that remains to be seen. But in the interim, the fallout from last night's bizarre statement, well, I say bizarre statement. The statement wasn't bizarre, the timing of it was bizarre. 5 past midnight. Who's awake at that time of night except the usual political nerds who monitor the frequencies 24/7? I can't be bothered doing that. I don't know many other people who did. But this morning, when Norrie phoned me up and told me about this, he was all excited, thinking this was a major crisis. And I'm thinking, well, it's a major crisis for some people who appear to have overreacted to it in a huge way. I don't think that this little pact between the SNP and Believe in Scotland is all that remarkable. What would be remarkable is if they extended the same invitation to everybody else. And as is pointed out by Liberation Scotland's article at the end, what would be more important would be for Believe in Scotland, which had originally touted the idea of having what used to be the second chamber of the Scottish Parliament, which would be where the public, in other words, the sovereign people, get to set policy, and supporting the idea of having that so-called Convention of the Estates back in place. That would be a great idea, and this is what the Believe in Scotland author, whoever wrote this article, actually said, that would be more important, and that Liberation Scotland would be expecting an invitation to join that convention along with all the other organisations. Again, I don't have a problem with that. That is exactly the sort of thing we should be saying. So, I don't know, I get the feeling that this badly timed article just dropped on the feeds at a time when people were deeply suspicious of anything which appeared to counter the generally accepted principles that Liberation Scotland was politically agnostic, that it didn't, support any one pro-independence party against any other. But simply because they mentioned this and say they supported the idea of it, they've been branded that way and people are threatening to resign. I hope, because I know that Salvo and Liberation Scotland are both part of the same group, that people like Sarah Salyers, Alf Baird and others who are in Salvo will come out and respond to this thing that happened last night, this article, because honestly I don't think it is a deliberate division. It sounds to me like they thought this would be a good idea to drop this article, but dropping it at 5 past midnight probably would set alarm bells ringing with many people, because it's easy to spoof a site. It's easy to write something which sounds plausible but shocking coming from an organisation like Liberation Scotland, to set the cat amongst the pigeons, a hand grenade if you like, a so-called dead cat story, something to distract your attention and get you fighting amongst yourselves. It is a tactic employed by the British state, and it does have people who do that. There are bot accounts that do precisely that, but they're not as sophisticated as to write a really lengthy article on the entire situation between the SNP and Believe in Scotland, and the broader context of cooperation between parties of independence and groups for independence. I just don't see that. I don't think if it were a deliberate sabotage attempt or a deliberate agent provocateur, if you like, that they would go to so much trouble over it. They would have had, you know, a very brief post that said something completely outrageous like, we support the SNP and nobody else is any good. That would have been, you know, the kind of post that should provoke a response where people resign. But that's not what's happening here. Anyway, make your own decisions. Go and have a look at the Liberation Scotland X account, because that's where you will find this article, and read it all the way through. And let me know what you think, because I honestly don't think that this is what people are saying it is. I think it's just an article which broadly supports the idea of connections between pro-independence parties and pro-independence groups and individuals. I don't think it's anything more than that. I think the timing of it was very suspicious and suspect, and that probably was what triggered the reactions of many people to it. Let me know what you think once you've had a read of the article. I'll see you soon. Bye for now. Oh, remember, keep the faith. Bye for now.